This week on Supercars Torque, Shane VanGisbergen and Garth Tander are your 2020 Supercheap Auto Bathurst 1000 winners. The day started off with a somewhat eventful warm-up. As they exited the pits, we saw Dean Fiore in the Scott Pye number 20 car. They had a sensor failure, looked like an engine failure, but apparently it was just a sensor. And seeing as though they replaced the sensor and got going and finished the race, must have been right. But they didn't get to do any laps in the warm-up, which was, not a good start to the day for them. What I'd forgotten about the warm-up, because you see the red flag come out and you think, oh yeah, that's all right. Everyone goes back to the pits and gets going again. No, the time on that one, it just keeps ticking while they brought the car back in, which seemed to take a hell of a long time considering where the car broke down and where they had to get it back to. Everything else ran smoothly except for Brock Feeney in the Boost Mobile James Courtney car. They changed the front rotor and that hadn't seated properly, which was causing the front left-hand wheel to wobble, and then they also had a buckled rear wheel on it. So although they brought it into the pits and got the rotor seated properly and put that all back together, when he went out of the pits, the back wheel was still wobbling its brains out. That was right at the end of the session though. Brock didn't really get any running in that warm-up either, which wasn't a great start to the day for him after he'd, stacked his Super 2 car the day before. But for his 18th birthday present to get to go out in a V8 supercar race at Bathurst, not too bad a present. Before the start of the race, we had all the typical kind of fluff pieces, I suppose. It didn't actually seem as bad this year. Not as much filler stuff. It was quite good. Lex Kelly made a reappearance, which was great. And question, I think, of the day went to him asking Lee Holdsworth, "Are you jealous of my dad's hair?" And all you could hear in the background was Michael Caruso pissing himself laughing. Bring back Lex. On a side note there as well, I was having a conversation with someone the other day and I'd said about, I think we need to move Scaife on and I'm not sure who to replace him with. They brought up Andy Jones as a replacement and I had a bit of a think about it and I've been paying a lot of attention to Andy over the weekend. And I think, you know who you are, I think you're quite on the ball there with that call. Even maybe adding a third person into the commentary team would be better as well, because it is a hell of a long day just listening to the same two people all day, essentially. It did help the commentary, though, when certain Jamie put it into the wall very early on in the race. So there didn't seem to be that same kind of love for that car or race, and it seemed to be a lot more balanced commentary team for the rest of the day. Now, this is a bit of a controversial one because some people are going to say this is what cost McLaughlin the race. I think they just weren't fast enough, which cost them the race. But I was surprised at how many teams started with the co-drivers. Even though the level of co-drivers is going up and up and up, they're not in the cars day in, day out. I mean, if you've got a Tander or a Lowndes or a Davison, you can throw them into the car and know that they're going to be fine starting off the race. But a lot of the other combos, I thought, why have they got Warren Luff in the car at the start of the race? And once again, he surprised me and they ended up on the podium as well. So, once again, before the race, I've written off Warren Luff because he's been out of the cars too long. He was not impressive as a solo driver. And once again, he just turns up Bathurst and does a brilliant job, and he's one of the best co-drivers out there. And, he'll get signed up again next year. And at the same point next year, I'll say he's getting too old. He's been out of it too long. He was no good as a solo driver. And, he'll probably surprise me once again. And apparently he's got 6 podiums in the last 9 starts up there. It's just ridiculous. he could he be challenging? I think it's Brad Jones as the best driver not to win the race. His results could nearly. I think he's probably had better results than Brad Jones up there now. Anyway, that's enough about that. I just think it's a little bit odd, the amount of co-drivers starting the race, because the pace that those guys can run at, you can, put them in for, say, stint 2 and 3 and 5 and 6 or whatever to, get their laps out still before that kind of 100 mark. But you don't have to have the pressure of them starting the race. But having said that, all the guys did a really good job, and it was actually the first one to put it in the wall was one of the best guys in the field, really. So we can't blame the co-drivers on that one, can we? Because there wasn't that many incidents in the race, really, I thought I'd just run through a bit about each car and how they did. I'll start with last and head up the field. In last position was Jamie Whincup and Craig Lowndes. Craig had a pretty good start to the day. They were running pretty well. As we all know, Jamie passed Brody Kostecki in Anton's car and then crashed it into the wall. It seemed strange because he was past. He could have taken his normal line and he just stuck it out wide and put it into the wall. Just very uncharacteristic, and maybe Jamie was over trying because he could see that, Tander was in front and, kind of cruising along at a decent pace. And maybe all he was thinking was, geez, I'm going to end up double stacking behind this car all day. I've got to get in front. And he came unstuck, and that was his day done. It went in hard. Next up in 24th was Todd Hazelwood. Jordan Boys spun it at the last turn and put it into the wall. It was a bit of an odd crash, that one. It seemed to happen quite late on. No one was hurt. They weren't really in the running anyway, so it probably doesn't matter. Gary Jacobson, they had another engine problem at Matt Stone Racing there. Bryce Fullwood, they had the old Wiggins clamp failed on the power steering, I think it was. God knows what a Wiggins clamp is, but, the commentary team were talking like I'm supposed to know. And then he crashed at Skyline right towards the end of the race. Synchronised problems with Jack Smith, who was the car in front, and caused that what happened to be the second last safety car in the end. Jack Smith was in 21st. He was spun by his teammate earlier on and then buried it in the Chase sand trap with 9 to go. Brendan Goddard, he crashed at the grate right at the end there. They were still in the race towards the end, so those guys had done okay, I suppose, until that point. But yeah, Tyler Everingham and Jaden Ojeda were in 19th. Ojeda had his third crash of the weekend down at the Chase there. That was a real weird one. It looked like he mounted the curb funny and broke the steering, and then he just went straight off to the left there and then straight into pit entry. They weren't running last at the time. They were going okay during the day. 18th, Nick Percat. So the Brad Jones team just had a day to forget. They had power steering issues early on, and then they had a misfire, and just nothing day. Rick Kelly, they had the clutch go off the start. It got off the start and then it was just, it went. They got the car going again, but they were so far back, they ended up 17th. Chris Pither was 16th, and I didn't even know this car was in the race. I don't even think we saw it on the telecast all day, so I can't say anything about them. Dave Reynolds, 15th. They did drop to 7 cylinders towards the end of the race, but it wasn't like, I think that the highest they got to all day was about 9th. And I was thinking, oh yeah, Dave's, really got that thing going, because they were just having I, I don't know what's happened. I don't know. Jack LeBrock in 14th. Apparently he gassed himself. There wasn't fresh air coming into the helmet, and he wasn't feeling well because he was getting gassed. James Moffat had to jump back in the car to finish the race. So, yeah, they were just kind of around the back of the top 10 all day anyway. They weren't really troubling anyone. Then we had, I nearly said Brad Jones. Macaulay Jones and Tim Blanchard, that opening door problem that they were having all weekend was still a problem this morning. But then they swapped the door over and it didn't seem to be a problem for the rest of the day. So I don't get that. Why didn't they swap the door over earlier? They spun their teammate in Jack Smith and they got a penalty for that, which was well deserved. The other Techno car was in 12th, Davison and Jono Webb. It's just two safe pairs of hands that bring a car home. Like the sister car, didn't even realise that they were in the race today. I vaguely remember seeing that bright yellow car on track a few times, but there was nothing really said about them all day. The same goes for 11th with Andre Heimgartner and Dylan O'Keefe. They did an okay job, just out of the top 10. It was just a very anonymous race as well. And then we get into the top 10. James Courtney and Brock Feeney, they were running around the back of the top 10 most of the day, somewhat anonymously, until Courtney decided to run Jack LeBrock off down Conrod Straight. I'm not sure if Jack had done something to James at some point, and it seemed like a bit of retribution. He got a bad sportsmanship flag for that, and then he passed Anton under the safety car, which I think they just redressed that. But it just seemed to lose the plot a little bit towards the end. Anton De Pasquale and Brody Kostecki were 9th. They just had no straight line pace all day. They also had a really long brake pad change towards the end, I think at the second last pit stop. Brody, he was very aggressive at the start of the race, and I'm not sure if they obviously had that straight line deficit that they were fighting, but I don't know if he needed to be that aggressive at the start of the race. He might have been better off letting a couple of people go and then settling into his pace. Instead of trying to hold, I think they were around about 5th at that point. Instead of trying to hold the car in 5th, maybe drop back to 6th or 7th or whatever, where the kind of the pace of the car was, and, make it a bit easier for yourself. Frosty. Mark Winterbottom and James Goulding, they, for 8th position, they actually had a pretty good day, considering they started at about 18th or something like that. They drove up to the front. They nearly looked like they were going to kind of be in contention at one point. I think they got around 4th or 5th at one point, and then they dropped back a little bit towards the end with the safety cars, and they just didn't kind of have that outright pace. But a typical Team 18 we're coming up to the teammate as well. But yeah, they just worked their way through there was a lot of people that were very anonymous kind of races, and not so much for a bad thing, just because things didn't go wrong, so they didn't really get a lot of camera time, and they weren't in that battle right at the front, so we didn't see a lot from them during the day. Lee Holdsworth was in 7th. They had radio troubles in that car, and they also had cool suit problems. I think some of the other Tickford cars had cool suit problems. These guys seemed to be affected the most by it. Scott Pye ended up 6th. If it wasn't for that sensor failure, another car that we just didn't see much of all day. Dean Fiore, he did quite a good job, in my opinion, in the co-driver. I'd written him off a little bit because he has been out of the seat a long time, but he did a good job, and really I would classify them as the best of the rest, because we're really kind of into the big guns up the front here. Scott McLaughlin was 5th, so they they did start McLaughlin, then Slade was in, then they had that safety car on lap 99, I think it was, and Slade had to get to lap 101 to get his laps over and done with. So, of course, it was all disaster, and, Slade actually did a really good job, even though the commentators kept going on about, how bad it was and this, it's all downhill, and, McLaughlin was shaking his head because, okay, Slade didn't have the ultimate pace of McLaughlin, but he was like 2 seconds behind Fabian when they ended up pitting and swapping over. So it's not like he lost them a heap of time. And then at the end of the race, it didn't look like McLaughlin had a heap of pace over Coulthard anyway and finished just behind. So you can't say it didn't cost them the race. They didn't have the pace. Coulthard and D'Alberto, really good job. Another one of those really anonymous days. They just didn't have the pace and ran around. And by not having the pace, they didn't have the ultimate pace of the top two. They just ran at their pace all day, and that was it. And fourth was the best that they could do, which really good job by Fabian, really. I've been knocking him, but he looked pretty much as quick as Scott all day today. So and D'Alberto once again did a great job as a co-driver. We move on to the podium positions now. Chaz Mostert and Warren Luff, perfect day. They just didn't have that outright pace. And once again, as I said, I write Luff off every year, and he does these drives at Bathurst. Chaz did great. They just did a really solid job, and the best they could hope for was third, because they just didn't have the pace. Cam Waters and Will Davison, so close, and yet so far away. I was really torn towards the end of the race because VanGisbergen and Waters haven't won it. Tander's one of my favourites of all time, but, he's already had a few Bathurst victories. And then you've got Davison kind of, he's a bit whingy and whatnot, but after what happened earlier on in the year, it would have been a really good fairy tale story for him to come back and win Bathurst after getting the arse. But it wasn't their day, and it was probably where we've been waiting for biblical rains all weekend, and we get that tiny little shower, and I think Shane was just lightning when the track got wet, and that's probably what cost them the race, because Shane made up those couple of positions and got in front and just never gave it up. Of course, Shane and Garth Tander, the winners, and they just drove perfectly all day. They didn't have problems in stops. They didn't have to double stack because the teammate destroyed the car. They were great. And each stint, you could see their car was just so consistent over each stint. And, Cam had come out of the pit stop and he seemed to, catch a bit. And then Shane had just kind of pull away, just slowly pull away as the stint went on, and you thought he's got it. As the only hope that Cam had was to get him off a restart, which is a big ask on Shane to try and get him off a restart. So they just did a flawless race, really, and that's what you have to do these days to win the great race. Now for the competition results. I'm sure everyone's on the edge of their seat for who won. 2 entries had the correct cars on the podium. No one got it exactly right. Unfortunately, Jeremy Chapman, you came second with Waters, Mostert, and then VanGisbergen. I had to give the winner to Chris Rodriguez, because he got VanGisbergen as the winner, and then Mostert and Waters. So really, really good there. When I went through, I was surprised at how few people actually picked VanGisbergen for the win. So it made it somewhat easier to try and find the winner. And funnily enough, Chris was one of the first people to enter, and Jeremy was one of the last people to enter as well. So anyway, Chris, if you can shoot me a line on my email, supercarstorque@gmail.com, or send me a DM on Instagram, Supercars Torque. Send me your address and whatever so I can post that out to you as soon as possible. The only problem is Australia Post at the moment is pretty hopeless living in Victoria, so it might take about 3 months to get to you over what's happening. But we did also have some good news for those of you interstate. There was a press conference around the middle of the day. My wife was watching it and handing me updates during the race. We're not fully out of lockdown or anything yet, but we've got a little bit of freedom back, so that's a bonus thing as well. Overall, it was a good Bathurst day had by all. So that's it for the racing for this year. Scott McLaughlin is the champion, and Shane VanGisbergen and Garth Tander are the Bathurst champions. That doesn't mean the videos stop for the year. I'll run through kind of the silly season plans because that's definitely ramping up. I'll have a bit of a rundown of the championship and who did what in the end, because there was a couple of little twists and turns at the end of the championship there. I've got some model reviews to do as well. There's plenty to look forward to in the off season. So until next time, I'll see you later.